Next morning now, you'll probably notice two things. First being that there is no drill press like I promised. On top of that, we are in the garage, and the reason for that is that it is absolutely pouring outside. It's a little bit lighter now than it was earlier, but still not great. So, as much as I don't want to do it with the car in here, I am going to get a bunch of the drilling and stuff done that shouldn't generate too much dust, and then hopefully this will clear up a little bit by the afternoon. I can get a couple final cuts done on the saws outside and hopefully get all the sanding done out there as well. But anyway, gotta get this moved so I can actually work in here. This is obviously taking up a lot of space, and then we can get to it.
As much as I really wanted that drill press, it was just 2 to 3 times the price that I was expecting that it was going to cost because, you know, quote unquote, supply chain issues and part shortages. But then I was thinking about it anyway, and because I want this to be a build with simple tools, I was like, yeah, let's just use what I have. That makes a lot more sense. But back to the build here, we are going to be drilling holes in the 2x4s that make up the frame of our bed, specifically that outer edge of the frame. Eventually, we are going to screw through the 2x4 to install the 2x8 as the outer face of our bed. But by pre-drilling these holes, it allows the screws to go through the 2x4 without splitting it and without cracking long term. I think I used a 1/16 or a 1/8 inch drill bit here. It doesn't matter that you're providing a lot of clearance for the hole. The fact that it's just there will prevent the wood from cracking. Now, as for the spacing of these holes and how many to drill, I put 2 that were 4 inches in from the ends when you have it the long way, and they were 1 inch in from the top and the bottom of the board, so about 1.5 inches apart. Then I marked out roughly every 6 inches along the entire board until I got to the center. I put a screw in the dead center, and then I measured in every 6 inches from the other side as well. And along each of these marks, you're going to alternate top and bottom of where you put one hole so that you're staggering these screws along the whole length. Now, I've said this repeatedly in the prior videos, I want this thing to be perfect, I want it to be super solid, and I want to have it for pretty much the rest of my life. So I put as many screw holes as I did because I want this thing to be way overbuilt. You could literally use like probably 3, maybe 4 screws along this whole thing and be okay. So if you're lazy or you really are trying to skimp cost on screws, by all means do it that way. But me personally, I'm built different and I want my bed to be built different, so I'm going to use as many screws as I damn well please. Now, the board that goes on the left and the right side should be the same length, and the board that goes at the head of the bed and the foot of the bed should be the same length. So as you can see here, I just clamped them together. I only had to measure once that way and marked them both at the same time. Another top tip that you'll see me doing here is I am using a hammer and a small punch just to tap in and make a little indent where I want those pre-drilled holes to be. This keeps the drill bit stable, especially with a very small drill bit, so there's no walkout and you get the hole exactly where you want it. Again, just helps it come out a little bit cleaner and go a little bit faster. But now that we have pre-drilled all 4 boards, we are ready to sand, and thankfully the rain was letting up a little bit. Now, once again, I was going way overkill on absolutely everything, so that is why I am sanding down the frame, the legs, anything that I could remotely see at any point in the future or potentially touch, even if it was just while I was making the bed or while I was moving it. If there was any chance at all, it got sanded for me. With that in mind, you don't need to necessarily sand this because you can't routinely see it after your bed is set up, and literally the only time that this will ever be a touch point is, again, when you're like reaching under your mattress or if you're moving your bed. So if you want to skip sanding all this, well, you can do that, but again, I was going for absolute perfection here. I knew it was going to be there and it was going to bother me. I started with an 80 grit on my orbital sander just to take out all the really rough spots. Then for anything that was more likely to be a touch point, so the outer perimeter of the bed that you're more likely to contact when you're making the bed, and any of the legs that would have been right behind the drawers, I used a more fine grit sandpaper on those sections only. So I went up to a 120 and then eventually all the way up to a 220. If you want, you could just go straight to a 180. It'll just take you a little bit more time, but anything in that kind of 200-ish range usually feels fine to the touch, unless you're the type of person whose hands are so sensitive that you can tell the difference between the leather in your Porsche and your Bentley. But if your hands are that sensitive, you're probably not building this bed on your own, so I don't suspect that's an issue for anyone watching this channel. After I finished the sanding, I was getting a little bit of afternoon sunshine, so I moved everything over to the center of my yard so that I could stain some of the perimeter boards. But what I did with some of the scrap pieces after I cut them is I tried out a few different stain types and a few different finishing techniques on those scrap pieces that are obviously cut from literally the same wood. This way I would would know how each finish looked on this product and I could choose the one that I thought looked best for where I was going to use it. Now, if I ever actually make that into a video, I'll link that below, but that's like pretty low priority, and it's going to vary so much on everyone's individual environment, what they use for a rag to apply it, how long they let it sit. There's just a lot of variables, so I would recommend just experimenting with finishes on your own and choosing one that works well for you. But jumping to this section here, it's going to show a couple side-by-sides of a few of the test pieces that I had. You'll see the actual products I used. The outer ones are using only those products, and then the inside two are the ones that I used the wood conditioner on before I applied them. So with that said, here's some of the results after I finished cleaning off everything that we're going to be staining.
Now, I conducted a test checking out the different finishes for both a Danish oil versus a wood stain. When I played around with both of these, the color of the Danish oil isn't that much different, and I think it soaks in a little bit better into the wood. For that reason, I'm going to be using the Danish oil on this furniture. So we might go back and poly it afterwards. That could be a future step. But even as a base coat, in case I don't get back to that, this I think is going to provide a better finish for what I'm trying to do. Now, these are kind of just the external surfaces that we'll be seeing routinely. So it's like the feet and then the top part around the perimeter of the bed. That might be visible if the sheets come untucked or if the mattress shifts over to one side or something. So those are all going to get stained. Everything else for the frame, I'm not going to waste my time doing that. And then the 2x8s on the outside, we don't have those fully prepped yet, so I'm not going to be staining those either. Like I said, this is going to be phases, so just the frame for now. I'm going to get a couple boards to elevate these off the table while they dry out. Other than that, we're going to get to it.
I do have another video that explains how to apply stain. I'm going to link that in the description below in case you don't know how to do that yet. But it's very simple. You literally pour it on, let it sit for a few minutes, and then wipe off the excess. Now, as I said, we're only staining the things that can be seen from the outside here. Even though I went through the effort of sanding everything so that I never had to worry about a splinter, I was realistic enough to know that we're never really going to see these inside boards, so wasting the stain on them is kind of a wasted effort and a wasted cost. But for all the things that we are staining today, I started off with one coat of the wood conditioner, then we went with 2 coats of this dark walnut Danish oil. Even though I've used a different brand on prior projects, I figured out that doing this many coats gave me roughly the same color finish, which means it almost perfectly matched everything else that I already have in my bedroom. And the color will look a little bit different after it's had a bit of time to dry, especially after 24 hours or a week of time. So once again, the best way to really be sure of how the color is going to look after it's done is to test one of the scrap pieces of wood as early as you can and give it a few days to dry so that you know it's going to look right after it's done. That's really the best and only way to make sure that you're not putting so much effort into this project just for it to be the wrong color and not look right and potentially just be ugly. But with the staining done and out of the way, we do need some time for this to set up and cure prior to being able to glue it and assemble it. Otherwise, the glue is not really going to adhere properly, and the glue can discolor the stain and leave weird marks. And I know that because I've done that before and kind of ruined something that I was working on. Yes, I was pretty disappointed in myself. But the part that I'm voicing over here, I was just saying that we're running out of daylight anyway, so this is a good stopping point not only for that day, but also to close out this video. So that concludes our prep work for the frame, and next time we will be assembling it. Like I said in the intro video, this project did take me a good amount of time. All of the staining and stuff, you have to wait afterwards. All the sanding just takes a lot of time, but you can do as much or as little as you desire to save yourself as much or as little time as you want. Either way, that is all I've got for this episode, so thank you guys for sticking around, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.